Ligeti, I think, is one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, perhaps the most recently canonized one, the greatest Jewish composer, arguably, of the 20th century, and a great innovator in a whole lot of fields, and especially in piano writing through his set of Études. I love the crazy adrenaline rush when playing the difficult Études, especially playing Désordre in concerts by heart is always a kind of a crazy, intense 2.5 minutes or so. I always feel very scared. I never had a complete catastrophe, but it always feels like living on the edge, which is kind of fun. You could look at very special experimental pieces like the finale of Schumann's second sonata, the discarded finale that he replaced with a more conventional one, or the finale of the third Schumann sonata, any number of pieces by Brahms that use hemiolas. And I think the starting point for Ligeti was this idea of taking the notion of hemiola and pushing it as far as possible to create not just momentary interruptions to the basic meters of the pieces, but consistent situations of multiple meters or multiple tempos at once. I think what Ligeti recognized was that the potential of the instrument to produce very complex textures that involved polyrhythm was underutilized, that the instrument is the only one that is capable of really producing textures that are so thick that they include several tempos at once, different pulsations, and all sorts of interesting interactions between them. These pieces have entered the canon because they are so consistent in their quality. They present enormous challenges because of their highly irregular and convoluted textures, and yet, on a deeper level, they are completely logical, and I think they really reward performers with a type of new aesthetic, a new way of relating to the instrument that hadn't existed before. Nobody should be made to learn such difficult music. I think the only reason for doing it is if you are so deeply in love with these pieces that you feel like you have to give them a try. I hope my modest advice can perhaps provide ways of looking into these pieces that may have seemed impenetrable at first, that they suggest new ways of conceptualizing it, of breaking it down into parts that are more practicable and manageable, and ultimately that they could save time for someone who's interested in engaging. The next way to practice that I think is very useful is to have one hand playing normally, while the other hand is going through the motions but without making any sound, so playing just above the keys in this manner. Or the other way around. This helps you because you are still focusing on playing both parts together, which is difficult. But in terms of the sound result, you are only monitoring one of the hands. So in this way, I think you can more easily spot areas where you are not quite secure or where something is going on. When we play things as humans, they're never going to be 100% accurate. And I think composers are aware of this. It's all about pushing the boundaries. And I think for someone watching a performance of these etudes, it is about the struggle to do something which is not human, which is not idiomatic. That is perhaps the key to identifying with the drama of this music. Before you can actually parse out the different elements in your ear, you notice that there is some kind of interesting struggle to watch. And I think that is what makes playing these live, imperfectly as we might, still very rewarding. We have definitely reached something that is very close to the absolute limits. And it's interesting that you think of Nancarrow's influence on Ligeti. Nancarrow wrote for player pianos because people weren't capable of playing his very dense and rhythmically complex music. What Ligeti did was to reverse that and try to humanize these impossibly complex tempo canons of Nancarrow. However, in some of the studies, particularly the last study of the second book, he ended up again with music that was unplayable. And so famously, Pierre-Laurent Aimard actually asked him to simplify one of them so that it could be performed live. And one of the results of that was that Ligeti decided to commission a person who was an expert again in player pianos to produce a player piano version of that same study. And so we're back to the need for machines to reach this ultimate level of precision. I think these etudes tend to produce a lot of tension because they require you to do very intense things in ways that are very physically awkward often. However, I do think that in terms of the listening capacity, we just learn to listen to more elements at once. And then when you go back, you suddenly have the bandwidth to listen to more parameters in traditional pieces. You're able to monitor the articulation, the timbre, the timing, all of these things without being distracted. The best way to explain that would be to refer to an old Jewish story about the guy who comes to the rabbi to complain to him and ask for his advice. And he says, you know, Rabbi, I have a household with 7 children and my wife, and we're all living in one room, and they're always screaming, and I can't sleep, I can't study, I can't do anything. What should I do? And the rabbi says, you know, what you should do is take your goat, the one that lives in your yard, and have the goat live with you. Come back in 2 weeks. I said, okay. But he takes the goat, he lives with the goat for 2 weeks, goes back to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, now remove it. And then you see that everything's fine. It's actually not so bad, 7 children screaming and so on. And so, I mean to say by this, that when you go back to traditional repertoire after this, there's just so many layers of difficulty that are gone. And suddenly your Mozart or Chopin or whatever it is can be, I think, much more lucid. You have like a different level of awareness of rhythmic precision, of differences in tone, of polyphony. These etudes are very hard. So I think it's important to remember that whatever stage you are, at whatever point in the process you are, it's, you know, it's good to try. And if you plateau, that's very natural. From my experience, the best thing to do is to just leave this aside for a month or 2 and then come back to them. And you can be surprised at how things get better when you just let them rest. So accept that this is a year-long, month-long at least, process to learn each one of these. I think the main thing you learn from these studies, even if you don't end up performing them, is new ways of listening to music.